So, thank you for joining me again today. We're going to go over the tools we need to overhaul a headset. First, we need a toothbrush. This is the same spanner that we got last time for the bottom bracket, the 32mm, 36mm HCW-15 from Park Tools. This is the Hosen C-205 from Japan. This is called a lock wrench, or lock ring wrench. And this is a 6mm Allen key. We need a grease gun from Dwelco. They make the best ones. These are steel as opposed to aluminum. And a pair of gloves, which are optional, a paper towel, and a Ziploc bag. The two types of cleaners we're going to be using today are Simple Green, which is going to help us get rid of all the old grease, and Fast Orange, which is a hand cleaner with pumice that's going to help us wash our hands when we're finished with the job. The reason we need to overhaul our headset is because all of the parts within our headset are loose, which causes the entire steering to wobble and vibrate around as you try to ride. Quite annoying. The first part of our process is to take our 6mm Allen key, insert it into the top of our stem bolt, and then to simply turn counterclockwise. Once we do a few turns, about 5 or 6 or so, we should be able to lift it straight up and out. However, sometimes it will stick a little bit, so what you can do is you can just take a hammer, give it a little whack on top, and then it should allow you to pull it right out. The next part of our process is to come over here with our 32mm spanner, the same one we used for our bottom bracket yesterday, and we're going to open this top nut up by turning it counterclockwise, and then simply screw it all the way off until we have it completely free. The next part of the process requires our lock ring spanner from Hosen. Without this, taking this 3-notch lock ring off the top is very, very difficult. So you're going to find which side works, and you're going to turn counterclockwise to loosen. You'll notice there's two sides to this. One side is for a different part of the bicycle, which we haven't covered yet, but it doesn't actually fit quite as well as the other side. Find the side that works, turn this counterclockwise until it's all the way off, and this last part is actually the only thing holding our steering tube, our fork, and our wheel in place. So once we take this out, this thing is basically going to fall apart. If you don't have a stand, try to wedge it up or put something to prop it up underneath it. Finally, we're going to open up our headset. This part actually has some grip for your hands, which is why I recommend using the gloves for this so you don't actually tear your hands up. Grab it real tightly and then simply turn counterclockwise. If your bike has been sitting outside and showing signs of rust, take some penetrating oil and just go around the ring of this. Then take a pair of channel locks, adjust it out a few notches, grab it real tight, and give it a good turn. So as you approach the last couple of threads of this part, I recommend taking your hand, placing it underneath the fork between the tire. That way, when you slide the fork out of the steering tube, it doesn't fall on the ground, land, and hit you in the shin or on the foot. So before we start to clean our parts, it's very important to notice which way our bearings and our bearing cage are going to be facing. Very similar to the bottom bracket we just did, we have a crown, and our crown is actually going to go up and into our cups, exactly like we did our bottom bracket. We have one bearing cage and bearing set down here, and we have another one hiding right up here. You don't know how many times I've overhauled these for customers, and the only thing wrong was somebody put this in backwards. Just remember, crown goes into the cup. Okay? Now you're going to take your dirty parts, place them in the bag, and then spray Simple Green in the bag. For this next part, we're going to take a little Simple Green and we're going to put it inside of our toothbrush, just like so. Now that we've got our toothbrush loaded up with Simple Green, we're going to come up here to our top cup and we're going to wipe all that old grease out. Then we're going to go to the bottom one and we're going to do the same thing. Get all that old stuff out of there. And we can't forget our bearing race, so we're going to do the same thing with our toothbrush. We're just going to go around and get the old grease off of there. Then we're going to let this sit for just a few minutes and we'll be good to wipe it off. So now that our parts have been sitting here for about half an hour, We've noticed that our simple green has turned from a bright green to a dark green, which lets us know that the old grease has been broken up and is now sitting at the bottom. We're ready to take this out back to the garden hose and wash it all out. If I were you, I would wash it and keep your parts inside the bag. That way none of your ball bearings or none of your parts fall into the dirt or fall out. If you do use the kitchen sink, be absolutely very, very careful, because these little bitty ball bearings can pop out of the bearing cages and fall right down the drain, making a huge, huge headache for you. Now we're ready to come over here with a dry paper towel or a microfiber cloth, and we're going to wipe up these cups. Get this old dirty grease out of there. First to the top and then the bottom, or vice versa, it doesn't really matter. Now that you've done it with a dry paper towel, now you're going to switch off to a wet paper towel. Your wet paper towel should come back pretty clean. Otherwise, you might want to just wait a little bit longer and give it another wipe. It's not too bad, but we're going to keep going just a little bit more. We want to get all the old grease out of there. Otherwise, we're going to risk contaminating the new grease, and the part's just not going to run quite as well. There we go. We're good to go now. Don't forget to do your bearing race too. It's not a bad idea to spray a little simple green in a rag and then come over here and actually wipe off your stem. There's going to be a lot of old grease on there. You might as well do a thorough job and just go ahead and get it all. Look at all of that. Yuck. Now even our stem and handlebars are clean. The whole headset, steering tube, and fork are all clean, so we're just about ready to put it back together. But before we do, we need to do a visual inspection of our bearings and our bearing cages to make sure there's no pitting, just like we did with the bottom bracket. We need to check both of them, and none of our bearings look dull or anything, so none of them need to be replaced. We need to go ahead and check the top race lock nut here, and this one's just fine. I don't feel or see any pits. You're going to see a little bit of a silver ring where the bearings have actually raced around. That's completely normal. We want to run our fingers inside of our cups, nice and clean, and the bottom too, checking for old grease and checking for pitting. Nice and clean. Now we check one last thing, which is our bottom bearing race. Coming back nice and clean, no pits, so we're good to go. So we're going to come over here and we're going to put some grease in the top cup of the steering tube, and we're going to come over here to the bottom and we're going to do the exact same thing. All we have to do now is we simply drop our first bearing cage in the top. Now we take our top headset lock nut and we make a ring of grease all the way around it. We're just going to take this and set this aside for just a moment. Now we're going to come over here to our bottom bearing race, and we're going to go around and add a ring of grease around it. Here comes the tricky part. So we're going to take one of our bearings and rings and we're going to drop it in place. And we're going to grab the top headset lock nut or cone. And as you do this, you want to try not to actually press the top ball bearing cage and bearings out, and then just screw this top cone on down to lock the headset back in place. At this point you should have two parts left. One is the spacer with 3 notches, and 2 is the final top lock nut. It looks a little like that. Okay? You should have installed the lock nut here that has the grip on it, and that's going to go, that's facing down with the cone side facing down. you should have installed both crowns. The bottom crown is facing up and the top crown is facing down. If you've done everything right, it should rotate and fit smoothly, and there should be no play when you pull on the wheel back and forth like this. So we're ready to install our 3-notch spacer, and we're going clockwise. And now we're ready to install our top lock nut. Okay, so the way to finesse this is to get the lock nut with the grip set at exactly where you want it by first creating just a small amount of play. And then once you create that tiny bit of play, you're slowly going to turn it very small increments clockwise until the play goes away completely. Once you've got your top headset cone with the grip on it just in place the way you want it, you're going to take your lock ring wrench and you're going to insert it into that middle spacer with the 3 notches. You're going to take your 32mm spanner and you're going to turn them into each other, locking these 2 top nuts into each other. This bottom one with the grip is not going to move. The motion looks like this. The most important thing is to take the spacer and the final top lock nut and to lock them into each other. That's what was not done to begin with on this headset, and that's why it was loose and had problems. We've got one last thing to do, and that is to wipe off the excess grease that will squeeze itself out of the bottom race. And we check our top just to see and make sure there's no grease going around there too. If we don't do this, what will happen is this is going to get really crusty and muddy as people ride, especially down here, because as the tire goes, it's going to throw a bunch of dirt up in there. Okay, congratulations, we've now overhauled our headset. We can now drop it down to the floor and set it down. So we've got exactly 2 more things left to do. One, we're going to take and put a little tiny bit of grease on our stem and then just wipe it around there, just like that. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to sit on top of our bike like this, and we're going to drop our stem down into our steering tube, just like so. Then we take our 6mm and we tighten her on up by tightening up our stem bolt, just like that. So for this last part, what you're trying to do is you're trying to align the top tube of the frame, the stem, and the front wheel all together. They should make a nice straight line. You may have to do it a few times in order to get it. Now, just for good measure, slide your hand in between the tire and the fork and see if you can get any play. Your stand's probably going to move ever so slightly, but if you feel any play inside the steering tube, or if you hear knocking or anything like that, or if when you try to turn you feel resistance, you're going to have to come back up to these bolts right here and do a little bit more finessing. If you need any of the tools that we've used today, please check the description below, and like, share, and subscribe. Please join me in the next episode when we overhaul the front wheel hub.